This video is about the wrongful conviction of Romeo Phillion. Romeo Phillion was born April 29th, 1939. He was 8 when he was sent to a training school for orphans and truants run by a Christian order. There, he was sexually assaulted and bullied. He learned to live by his wits and committed petty crimes to survive. He also compiled a criminal record that included convictions for living off prostitution, theft, and assault. What happened to Romeo Phillion? Romeo was wrongfully convicted and was sentenced to life in prison without parole eligibility for 10 years. He was found guilty for murdering an Ottawa firefighter, Leopold Roy, who was stabbed to death. When a first responder is hurt intentionally, this can create a lot of pressure from the media and the public. A lot of media coverage could be brought to the attention of this case, and having Romeo Phillion as the main suspect and the accused. The media would have had a field day when the police arrested someone to do with this case. Romeo was in jail for 31 years, and finally on April 29th, 2010, the Crown withdrew the murder charge against Romeo and he was cleared on the day he turned 71, as April 29th was his birthday. Although, while he was in jail, he never applied for parole as he thought that would have been admitting that he had killed Leopold Roy, which is very interesting because even if someone was innocent, I would assume they would apply for parole as they would want that freedom, but Romeo never did. So we are first going to break down how this all happened. Unfortunately, at the beginning, it was just a coincidence of how Romeo got involved in the case. Romeo was not a goody two-shoes. Due to his upbringing, he had a fair share of run-ins with the law. When the crime originally took place, Leopold Roy's wife, Mildred Roy, had assembled a composite sketch with the police of the killer she had seen. Phillion's then-girlfriend told the police that he resembled the sketch. At the time, Phillion was at the station on an unrelated charge. This is the coincidence. Police put Phillion in a lineup, which Mildred Roy stated that there was a resemblance, but she could not make a positive identification. This was interesting, as sometimes police put in suspects that they think the identifier will pick. This is not always a good thing because the brains of an eyewitness can sometimes trick them into thinking someone was there when they really were not. But if the focus is always on this singular person, the eyewitness starts to believe that that person was really there. Luckily, at this point in time, Mildred had also identified 3 other men who she believed to be her husband's killer. The police released all 3 suspects. But what is important to note is at this point when the crime originally happened, Romeo Phillion pre-offered an alibi, saying that he had been several hours away from Ottawa that day. It is also important to note that if Phillion was not at the police station that day on an unrelated charge, Mildred, the victim's wife, would have never seen him and made that connection to the resemblance of the sketch that the police had made and him. Romeo was in trouble with the law again due to an armed robbery of a taxi driver. Now, this was a couple years later. Phillion's boyfriend at the time was also brought in for questioning. Now, it is important to note that Romeo Phillion was bisexual. Back in the 1970s, sexuality was very black and white. However, there was nothing stated in this case that due to his sexuality, his conviction was affected. However, it is something to note. Getting back to the case, when Romeo's boyfriend was brought in for questioning, Romeo asked his interviewer if Neil, his boyfriend, had told them anything about him. This is where the police lied and said Neil had told them a lot about Romeo, And this is where, out of nowhere, Romeo confesses to killing the fireman, which was Leopold Roy, which happened a couple years back. I would say the police tactic of lying to a suspect to get them to confess was used here. However, the police were even surprised that Romeo confessed to this, as Romeo was in on an unrelated charge. So things aren't exactly adding up why he confessed, but let's keep moving on to investigate that. The trial started in late 1972 for Romeo Phillion, and there were three key pieces of evidence the Crown built their case upon. Now, looking at these three key pieces of evidence, none of these really add up to be the main things that this trial was going off of. Mildred's identification was already very unreliable, and as mentioned in the start, she had identified three other men whom she believed to be her husband's killer in 1967, when the incident originally happened, and she could not possibly ID Phillion at the time either, so what changed from then to now? Romeo's confession came out of nowhere, and with the thoughts of what the two experts said about his health, where he suffers from an antisocial personality disorder, which makes him prone to lying and make up stories to make him feel important, the experts believed Romeo's desire to feel important had prompted him to falsely confess to Leopold's murder. That, to me, is a thought for more investigation. This should have been a major thing used by the defense to get Romeo off his conviction. And also the point that he had an alibi, yet that was not looked into or investigated. It's a big red flag. On the very night of his confession, he recanted to another police officer that he explained that he was innocent, and Neil and him, his boyfriend, had came up with a scheme to send police on a wild goose chase and enable them to collect the reward money from Neil's report of his false confession. So this is yet another reason why this should not have been a key piece of evidence, because it was easily backed up with what Romeo had told another police officer when he recanted his statement. It seems like there was a suppression of evidence to the jury, as these things were not known, or if they were suppressed, which these points could have resulted in a very different outcome for Romeo. Also, knowing Romeo's antisocial disorder, connecting his recanted statement to the police officer makes complete sense. Phillion's attempt to appeal to the Ontario court was denied, although his argument was that he had been deprived of the presumption of innocence to which all accused persons are entitled to. His appeal to the Supreme Court failed, in which then he started writing letters to the Minister of Justice stating that he had been out of town at the time of the murder and wanted his case to be reopened. It wasn't until 1988 that Romeo's parole officer gave him an envelope containing police reports from his Corrections Canada file. One of these documents was a police investigation report that had been prepared on April 12, 1968 by the investigating officer, Detective McCombie. This report appeared to provide Romeo with an alibi. It indicated that Detective McCombie had spoken to a Trenton service station operator who confirmed that Romeo had been in Trenton between 12 and 1 p.m. on August 9th, the day of Leopold's murder. This document was never shown in trial, which, if it was, it could have swayed the outcome a very different way. But when thinking that there was most likely a lot of public pressure on a conviction, was this document purposely lost, or what happened to it? Due to this document, in 2003, Romeo was able to get his case reopened with the assistance of the Innocent Project, and he was awarded bail, and that ended his 31-year jail sentence. So the Crown found that there was a great deal of confusion surrounding whether and when the police learned further information that discredited this alibi. The detective on the case testified that he had retrieved tow records of Romeo's car showing that he could have actually been back in Ottawa at the time Leopold Roy was killed. However, there was no evidence to confirm that. And the Minister of Justice on the case concluded that there was a lack of documentation on this case and numerous other exhibits of the miscarriage of justice. The Crown withdrew the murder charge against Romeo on April 29, 2010, due to there being no reasonable chance that a new trial would result in his conviction. It is interesting to note that the detective on the case was never charged with any wrongdoing because he had a very distinguished career and a good reputation. When the court heard testimony by Dr. Gotchinson, the world's foremost expert on psychology of false confessions, he sheds light on the baffling decision. Gotchinson explained that voluntary false confessions are actually common in high-profile cases, such as Romeo's. He also said that Romeo did suffer from antisocial personality disorder as well as borderline personality disorder. The police investigation was plagued with an incredible degree of disorganization, loss of evidence, failure to keep records of their investigations, and a suppression of evidence. Too much emphasis was put on Mildred Roy's eyewitness testimony. It was not very credible, however, many people believed in her testimony. Eyewitness misidentification is a very big leading cause to wrongful convictions, as many people tend to make themselves believe someone was there when they're really not. Romeo was the longest-serving Canadian to have a murder conviction overturned. In 2013, he was denied the right to sue for compensation by the Superior Court, which is just unbelievably baffling. It was overturned on the appeal, and ultimately, the Supreme Court gave him the right to proceed, but he passed away November 2nd, 2015. He never received any compensation. He was a supporter of others who were wrongfully convicted and made himself available to attend their court hearings and to encourage and listen to them. Overall, Romeo Phillion's case was a big miscarriage of justice, and today we study these cases in hopes that the justice system will improve for the future. The two resources I pulled my information and research from was the Innocence Canada website and the Canadian Encyclopedia. I encourage anyone looking for more details about the case to visit either of these websites. Thank you so much for watching.